In the 1950s, a weapon was invented that has become more powerful than America's deadliest weapons of mass destruction. It is the weapon of mass deception, and it is right in our own living rooms. The hypnotizing world of picture television brings us the news of the world through two central news agencies called Reuters and the Associated Press. The Rothschilds bought Reuters in the 1800s, which later bought the Associated Press and made the Rothschild family owners of the world's largest central news services. To the present day, the world depends on these Rothschild-owned central news services as their main source of news and information. In his book called Who Owns the TV Networks, author Eustace Mullins claims that the major TV networks, radio stations, newspapers, and publishing empires are controlled by the Rothschild, Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan money cartels through their corporate conglomerates. The bankster-owned media conglomerates include weapons manufacturers General Electric and Westinghouse, which profit from promoting wars. Their man in Washington is head of the FCC Federal Communications Commission, and his name is Michael Powell, the son of Colin Powell. Michael Powell was put in charge of changes to the media monopoly rules and who can own what. Joining public opposition to Michael Powell's FCC deregulation policies, Senator Byron Dorgan had this to say.
Seldom have I seen a regulatory agency cave in so completely to the big economic interests. That's exactly what happened today with the FCC rules. And Chairman Powell kept suggesting slight modifications. It's not slight at all. This is a big deal. It's going to affect what the American people can see, can hear, can read. And let me emphasize something that was in your setup piece. After what the FCC did today, it is likely, in fact, that in big American cities we will see the same company own the newspaper, 3 television stations, 8 radio stations, and the cable system in that city, all under one company. And I don't know what happened to this notion of competition, but I'm telling you, it's not there, and it's not embedded anywhere in the FCC's decision.
Well, I'm just going to have to say that there are a lot of lies being told.
In his new book, Brock says the key to the success of the right-wing media is opinion, predicated on a raft of distortions, misrepresentations, and outright lies presented to the readers and viewers as fact.
I think it used to be...
Control over the internet, publishing, recording, and top cable companies can be traced back to the same big 5 media empires: General Electric, Time Warner, Viacom, Disney, and News Corp. These media monopolies are owned directly or indirectly by the Rothschild, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and Oppenheimer Brotherhood. Yes, there are now more stations and more media voices, but they're all coming from the same ventriloquist, says Senator Dorgan. Every TV show needs corporate sponsors, and corporate sponsors sponsor pro-business, pro-government programming, and journalists who support the agenda of the big 5 media owners. While 2/3 of the world goes hungry, these banksters offer gazillion-dollar sponsorships to sports athletes to play with their balls. Why? Because they keep the masses distracted from the important issues, like the passage of the Patriot Act to limit your civil rights and freedoms.
The Patriot Act allows the government to come into your home, take things from your home, search your home, and never tell you about it.
Increasingly, however, Americans are speaking out.
The media and banking monopolists now have the power to make or break political leaders around the globe. Why haven't the networks made a TV movie of the week about how the Bush family made their family fortune? The movie could be called The Awful Truth, starring George W.'s great-grandfather, Samuel P. Bush, whose Buckeye Steel Castings Company supplies parts for Edward Harriman's railroads, who in turn provides rail shipments for John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil, who in turn gets monopoly financing from the Rothschilds. The movie could be made into a TV series starring Samuel's son, Prescott Bush, as the managing director of a Nazi steel manufacturing plant in Poland called Silesian Consolidated Steel. In episode 1, Prescott Bush forwards American financing to his German partner Fritz Thyssen through the Union Banking Corporation in New York. Fritz Thyssen arranges a contract with Nazi Germany's IG Farben company for free Jewish slave labor in Bush's steel manufacturing plant at the Auschwitz concentration camp. Episode 2 shows Skull and Bonesmen Prescott Bush and Avril Harriman getting caught under Trading with the Enemy Act as the U.S. government moves in and seizes all of their shares in Union Banking Corporation. In episode 3, Prescott's son, the first George Bush, is director of the CIA. George puts drug king Manuel Noriega on the CIA payroll, allowing thousands of tons of cocaine to hit the streets of America via the Panama Canal. In episode 4, George's son, the second George Bush, becomes partners with Osama bin Laden's older brother, Salem bin Laden, in a Texas oil company called Arbusto Energy. Episode 5 introduces George W.'s shady younger brother, Neil Bush, ripping off the elderly in the Silverado savings and loan scandal that cost U.S. taxpayers $1.3 billion. In episode 6, the Florida election is fixed by George W.'s older brother, Jeb Bush, who puts brother George into the top job at the White House, which brings us back to Auschwitz and the concluding episode with George W. Bush visiting the slave labor camp where his grandfather helped build the Bush family fortune on free Jewish slave labor.
These sites are a sobering reminder of the power of evil and the need for people to resist evil.
Ladies and gentlemen.
As a follow-up to the TV series, an award show could celebrate the 20-year friendship of the Bush and bin Laden families and their shared investment in the Carlyle Group. The Carlyle Group is one of America's largest weapons contractors. For the Bush and bin Laden families, war means profits, big profits. Although the media creates the illusion of freedom of the press, the dominant opinion and messages always serve the banksters' agenda. Messages like, support your troops or you're a traitor to America. But who are the troops? Many are teenagers whose childhood entertainment was shooting out the blood and guts of virtual people in places that are virtually real. Now they're blowing up real people in places that are really real, like schools, hospitals, and villages filled with families and children.
Burns, open wounds, amputations, spinal cord injuries, broken bones, eyes that have been sprayed with shrapnel. The list is long and predictable.
The chilling reality is that up to 15% of the tax money deducted from your paycheck each month buys the bombs and pays the salaries of troops to commit these atrocities. Rivers of blood from innocent families and their children is on everybody's hands. The plan for world domination by the banksters cannot be accomplished without your cooperation. That plan was formulated in 1773 at Mayor Rothschild's goldsmith shop by 13 influential German Jewish families. Among them were Rothschild, Oppenheimer, Warburg, and Schiff. Their formula for global control is the 3M formula: money control, media control, and military control.
2, 1, mark, and visual confirmation.
Like changes to the rules that gave these families the media and money monopolies, new laws are being passed to transfer military control to them by privatizing the military. But if they're killing terrorists, who cares if they are government soldiers or corporate soldiers? A more important question to ask is, who exactly are the terrorists and where do terrorists get their training? The answer is right smack in America at Fort Benning, Georgia. Until January 2001, America's terrorist training school was called School of the Americas, but because of massive protests against its activities, the name was changed to WISC, Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. Actress Susan Sarandon narrated a documentary film called School of the Assassins. The film exposes the school as a terrorist training camp whose graduates are well-known murderers, torturers, state terrorists, and dictators, including drug king Manuel Noriega. The role of terrorists in the bankster-owned media is to scare the living tax dollars out of citizens, and timing is everything. On the second anniversary of the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center, George Bush asked for an $87 billion increase in military spending. At the same time, the media released a dramatic video showing Osama bin Laden alive and well and threatening to make the 9/11 attack seem like foreplay. How much do we really know about America's favorite villain? Multimillionaire Osama bin Laden was the 17th of 52 children fathered by a wealthy construction baron named Mohammed bin Laden, who had close ties to the Saudi royal family and the Bush family. In 1979, the American CIA and Pakistan's ISI financed an anti-Soviet group in Afghanistan and provoked a profitable 10-year war with the Russians. When the Russians invaded Afghanistan, the CIA hired Osama bin Laden to recruit and train al-Qaeda fighters to fight the Russian army.
Invasion. Anti-communist guerrillas in Afghanistan have been at the front line in the fight against the spread of communism.
But what was the fight really all about? Not carrots or potatoes. It was about poppies, endless fields of opium poppies that provide over 70% of the world's heroin supply to heroin addicts worldwide.
These are very uncomfortable issues for politicians.
It was a dramatic story, but the media failed to tell us the less heroic side of Afghanistan's freedom fighters. America's new friends had become hooked on the economics of the poppy. During the war, many of the mujahideen radically increased the production of opium, the raw ingredient of heroin.
The international drug trade began in 1606 when Queen Elizabeth I built England's wealth by trafficking illegal opium from India to China. British East India Shipping Company and profited handsomely, not just from drug trafficking, but from trafficking African slaves with her slave trader, John Hawkins. First, knighted her slave trader with the noble title of Sir John Hawkins. By 1830, the British had distanced themselves from dope dealing by granting opium monopoly rights to the Jewish Sassoon family, who became known as the Rothschilds of the Far East. As an agent for the Crown, David Sassoon shared his dope profits with Queen Victoria.
The British East India Company built a major factory to process the opium here at Gazipur. It's still a lucrative earner for the Indian government, which sells opiates to the world's pharmaceutical industry.
When the Chinese banned opium and destroyed 600 chest loads of the addictive drug, Sassoon and the British retaliated.
It was a financial disaster for the British. With huge profits at stake, they retaliated with the Opium Wars of 1843 and 1858. The forces of the market were to defeat China's moral prohibition.
Sassoon and the British forced drug addiction onto an entire nation, stole the island of Hong Kong, and made Hong Kong the capital of the British international drug trade. In 1872, Queen Victoria knighted David Sassoon's son, Albert Sassoon, who spread the illegal opium trade throughout China and Japan. In 1887, Sir Albert Sassoon married Aline Carolyn Rothschild and joined the pirated fortunes of the Sassoon drug cartel with the Rothschild money cartel. Today, it's business as usual for the descendants of the Sassoon and Rothschild families who socialize with Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Charles as elite members of Britain's inner power circle. Many have been granted royal titles like Sir, Countess, Baron, and Marquis, but their many victims aren't fooled by the crowns, the titles, and the tuxedos. They have very different titles for them. Titles like liars, thieves, dope dealers, and mass murderers for the crown. On the other side of the Atlantic, a member of the same opium smuggling syndicate, Samuel Russell, founded Yale University's Skull and Bones Brotherhood with drug money. Exclusive members were financed into political power positions in the CIA, the U.S. Supreme Court, and the White House. When Skull and Bonesman George Bush Sr. became CIA director in the 1980s, the CIA recruited Osama bin Laden to train al-Qaeda and Mujahideen fighters in Afghanistan. The job of Osama's trainees was not just to fight the Russian communists. It was to run Afghanistan's multi-billion-dollar opium trade. Heroin, manufactured from Afghan opium, supplied $250 to $300 billion annually to Wall Street and the U.S. banks. Authors Alfred McCoy and Michael Levine tied the CIA to this unholy drug alliance and received national attention when the CIA tried to suppress their books.
Michael Levine became a best-selling author when he wrote about his experience of this unholy alliance. After 30 years' distinguished service with the DEA, he could write with some authority.
You could look at what they did to me as an example in microcosm of Central Intelligence's actions and the State Department in completely subverting the drug war. You know, the drug war was something that only existed in the minds of Americans, on the streets of America, for kids like my brother, for cops who died. There was no drug war. The biggest drug dealers in the world were given a license to sell drugs to Americans to support themselves. And this continued right down from Southeast Asia, through the Mujahideen, through the Contras.
But how was the heroin smuggled into the United States? One of America's most gruesome secrets is that during the Vietnam War, heroin was smuggled into the United States by hiding it inside the body bags of dead American soldiers. By the end of the 1960s, 1/3 of U.S. soldiers in Vietnam and close to 1 million United States citizens were hooked on heroin. Drugs like LSD, mescaline, marijuana, and hashish also swamped the streets and college campuses of America. Who or what turned America's youth onto these illegal drugs? Celebrity anti-war activists like Aldous Huxley, Timothy Leary, Allen Ginsberg, and Bertrand Russell sold America's youth on acid rock, tripping out, and one world government. Their financing came from the Warburg Banksters and IPS, Institute for Policy Studies. Over 100 million doses of LSD that hit the streets of America were purchased by Timothy Leary and Alan Dulles through S.G. Warburg's Sandoz AB Pharmaceutical Company in Switzerland. Free sample-size packages of acid were handed out not only on college campuses, but at rock concerts, where musicians persuaded millions of fans to get high.
I got the
critics of the drug culture blame parents, teachers, law enforcement, and everybody except the people behind it all, namely the Rothschild-Warburg banksters and their Committee of 300. According to Dr. John Coleman, who wrote the story of the Committee of 300, the Beatles rock group were brought to America by the Tavistock Institute. Tavistock launched the drug culture revolution in America to popularize and normalize social drug use. Through their record companies and advertising monopolies, the banksters have packaged and financed their celebrity salesmen to anesthetize, addict, and enslave billions of people worldwide with dependencies on both prescription and non-prescription, legal and illegal drugs. Those drugs range from alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine to Prozac, crack cocaine, and heroin. Like the phony war on terrorism, the phony war on drugs is a cat and mouse game being fought with one hand and fed with the other. The peace symbol adopted by the drug flower children of the 60s was designed by Gerald Holtham, who was commissioned by One World Government salesman Bertrand Russell. The symbol was never designed as a symbol of peace, but as a symbol of death. It is actually a cross turned upside down with the arms broken and is used by Satanists and in Druid witchcraft. In Germany, the symbol is known as the death rune and is found on tombstones of Hitler's Nazi SS officers. CIA's team of ex-Nazis and Skull and Bonesmen financed and trained Osama bin Laden, who pushed the Russians out of Afghanistan by 1989. The CIA then trained and installed the ruthless Taliban regime to run the booming opium trade. After a decade, the long friendship between America and the Taliban suddenly turned ugly. At a meeting held on December 4th, 1997 at Unocal headquarters, American oil men made a proposal to the Taliban about building a pipeline through Afghanistan. Rothschild Shell Oil and Rockefeller's Exxon Oil had invested billions in the Kazakhstan oil and gas reserves just north of Afghanistan. Now they needed a pipeline to transport it to the Persian Gulf. The Taliban demanded a bigger cut and turned down the proposal. Suddenly, the banksters' American-controlled media were calling the Taliban monsters, evildoers, and cruel villains who beat up on women. On July 4th, 1999, President Clinton froze the Taliban's U.S. assets and bank accounts and imposed trade sanctions on Afghanistan. By February 2001, the Taliban destroyed most of Afghanistan's opium crops. In May, Secretary of State Colin Powell announced a gift of 43 million U.S. taxpayers' dollars to the Taliban. He called it a reward to the Taliban for destroying the opium crops, but members of the new George W. Bush White House knew the Taliban would use the 43 million for more sinister purposes.
The larger issue is not just not connecting the dots, but not getting the dots. Why was it that CIA was unable to collect information for years inside Afghanistan when they had authority to kill bin Laden for over 2.5 years? Why were they unable to kill him or his lieutenants? Why didn't they have a better capability to do something about it at the source?
Could it be that the bankster-supported U.S. administration is controlling both sides of the war on terror? Before the first plane ever even hit the first tower on 9/11, a massive U.S., British, and NATO troop buildup was already organized and positioned for an attack on Israel's enemies, opium-rich Afghanistan and oil-rich Iraq.
And there's an old poster out west, as I recall, that said, "Wanted, dead or alive."
With no solid proof of who was responsible for 9/11, George Bush Jr. attacked the poverty-stricken war-ravaged country of Afghanistan only 4 weeks after 9/11. The U.S. and British military dropped 12,000 bombs on thousands of buildings and homes, pounding them into dust and rubble and killing 8,000 Afghan people. 20,000 more people died from war-related cold, starvation, and disease. Nobody made a big-budget TV production out of the massacre with a God Bless Afghanistan movie score. The U.S.-British war on Afghanistan left behind millions of starving people and thousands of women who are still veiled, still homeless, and still penniless.
Afghanistan is the world's largest producer of opium and now the world's largest producer of heroin.
دې علت دا ده چې 14 کاله دلته جنگ تیر شوی، زراعت تباه شوی، شفاخانې تباه شوي، تجارت تباه شوی، تعلیمي ادارې تباه شوي، مکتبونه تباه شوي، سرکونه تباه دي، ولږه ده، فقر ده، خلک بله چاره نه لري څه وکړي.
There can never be peace and democracy in Afghanistan. Why? Because peace and democracy would expose and cut off corporate America's opium and heroin trade at the source. So what was the payoff for the U.S.-British war on Afghanistan? 1, the uncooperative Taliban warlords got kicked out and replaced by the cooperative Northern Alliance warlords. 2, opium and heroin production and revenues skyrocketed. 3, Afghanistan got a new leader named Hamid Karzai, who just happens to be an ex-employee of Unocal Oil. 3, America got permission to build their oil and gas pipeline through Afghanistan. And 4, the Bush administration's favorite excuse for war, Osama bin Laden, was allowed to escape. America's second favorite excuse for war, Saddam Hussein, has always been America's patsy. In the 1980s, the United States supported Iraq's invasion of its neighbor, Iran, to stop the spread of Iran's Islamic Revolution. America played both sides of the Iran-Iraq war by supplying Saddam with chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction, and at the same time, America secretly sold weapons to Iran and illegally diverted the money to the Contra-revolutionaries in Central America.
During the war, the United States sent a special envoy to see Saddam in 1983. He was Donald Rumsfeld, now the U.S. Defense Secretary. The two men discussed how to reinforce Iraq against a common enemy. This was at a time when Iraq was using chemical weapons on Iranian troops. U.S. companies were supplying components with Washington's knowledge.
By 1990, President George Bush Sr. tricked Iraq into another war with another oil-rich neighbor, Kuwait. How? By supplying Kuwait with horizontal drills that could reach beneath the border of Iraq and siphon oil from Iraq's oil fields. Kuwait used the U.S.-made drills to steal 300,000 barrels of oil per day from Iraq, worth over $3 billion annually.
The fuse was lit, and Kuwait did nothing to put it out. They pumped oil without restraint from Rumaila oil field, which was accessible to both Kuwait and Iraq, and they exceeded OPEC quotas, flooding the market and driving prices even lower.
George Bush Sr. officially promised not to interfere in Iraq's legitimate oil battle with Kuwait, but when Saddam's army entered Kuwait to defend their oil reserves, Bush pounced on them.
Our goal is not the conquest of Iraq. It is the liberation of Kuwait.
America disposed of its toxic waste problem by building radioactive depleted uranium right into their bombs and dropping them on Iraq. Bush Sr. not only devastated and poisoned Iraq's water systems and infrastructure, he weakened the economies of both Kuwait and Iraq, collected giant profits from rationed Iraqi food for oil programs, and landed massive rebuilding contracts in Kuwait. Bush Sr. followed up the Gulf War with 10 long years of deadly trade sanctions that killed another 1.5 million Iraqi people, including 600,000 children who were cut off from medical supplies.
A bookstore in the United States today, you can find 50 books celebrating different aspects of the war and how grand it all was. And you only find one that points out that this was a war crime. that demonstrates the evidence that shows that we deliberately targeted civilians and killed more than 250,000 people in Iraq.
You'll be fighting not to conquer anybody, but to liberate people.
In March 2003, President George Bush Jr. launched the second Gulf War. The war on Iraq wasn't about revenge for 9/11, since not one of the 19 accused terrorists were Iraqi citizens. It wasn't about weapons of mass destruction, which inspectors hadn't found. It wasn't even about Saddam Hussein, who had been financed into power by the U.S. in the first place and who got his chemical and biological weapons from American companies. No, the U.S. wars against Iraq and against Afghanistan were about mass murder and piracy. They were about big weapons sales, big oil, big pipelines, big drugs, and big rebuilding contracts. They were about colonizing the Middle East and moving 2 giant steps closer to world domination.
Come out! Open the door! Open the door! Get your hands up and come outside. Come outside. Everybody in the house needs to come outside. Out here in the yard, out here in the yard. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Keep going. No one there. No one in that one.
Yeah, clear the house now. Let's sweep on down straight.
Keep going.
أنا أروح أشتريها ب6 أنفار. أنا ما أريد هاي الحرية، ما أريد هاي الديمقراطية، وأخويا وأطفاله راحوا من عندي، وهذا اللي ترونه ها من الدماء والجروح واللي الدمار اللي
The theft and devastation of this ancient land by the U.S. government closely resembles the theft and devastation of Palestine by the Israeli government.
Showed the POWs and the dead soldiers. Al Jazeera showed them. It was powerful because America doesn't show those kind of images. Most of the news in America won't show really gory images, and this showed American soldiers in uniform strewn about a floor, a coal tile floor, and it was revolting. It was absolutely revolting. It made me sick at my stomach. And then what hit me was the night before there had been some kind of bombing in Basra, and Al Jazeera had shown images of the people, and they were equally, if not more horrifying than images were. And I remember having seen it in the Al Jazeera office and thought to myself, wow, that's gross. That's bad. And then going away and probably eating dinner or something, and you know, it didn't affect me as much. So the impact that had on me realizing that I just saw people on the other side, and those people in the Al Jazeera office must have felt the way I was feeling that night. And it upset me on a profound level that I wasn't as bothered as much the night before. It makes me hate war.
Tougher every day. Some soldiers are even taking aim at their leaders. One told ABC News, if Donald Rumsfeld was here, I'd ask him for his resignation. Another suggested the deck of playing cards displaying wanted Iraqi commanders should be revised. The aces in my deck, he said, include Donald Rumsfeld and George Bush.
Since 1995, the General Accounting Office has ranked the Defense Department's financial management among the worst in the federal government on the GAO's list of high-risk areas vulnerable to waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement. What's more, in fiscal year 2000, the Defense Department's own Inspector General found the Pentagon could not account for more than $1 trillion, trillion with a T.
Private First Class Lindy England may never have figured these images would beam into the homes of millions of horrified people. Whatever she might have thought at the time, she says she and her comrades had no choice.
Told to stand there, give a thumbs up, smile, stand behind all the naked Iraqis in the pyramid, take a picture.
Who told you to do that?
Persons in my higher chain of command.
Why were naked Muslim prisoners positioned on top of each other in the shape of an Egyptian pyramid? The answer can be found in the distant past. In ancient times, Iraq was called Babylon.
The year is 586 BC. The armies of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, descend on Jerusalem with the wrath of an angry God. It is almost 6 centuries before the birth of Christ. The Romans have not yet even dreamed of empire. It is a dark chapter in the history of the Jews, while Babylon's fierce star is rising. The Bible describes the Babylonian attack. Homes are pillaged, King Solomon's temple is set ablaze and utterly destroyed.
Saddam Hussein made the mistake of comparing himself to Babylon's King Nebuchadnezzar. The capture of Iraq and Saddam Hussein was not just about oil and colonization, it was also about settling an old Hebrew score.
We got him.
On December 13th, the producers of 911 released a new reality TV show called We Got 'Em. The Iraqi people claimed the We Got 'Em video show was staged. Why? Because the video shows ripe, yellow-colored dates growing on a tree to the left of the hole, where Saddam Hussein was supposedly captured. Every Iraqi citizen knows that Iraqi dates only ripen and turn yellow in July and August, never in December. Since date trees don't tell lies, the We Got 'Em video had to be staged at least 3 months earlier in July or August, not on December 13th as reported. How could Saddam, who is almost 70 years old and over 6 feet tall with a bloated belly, squeeze in and out of a hole that small? How could he have grown a beard that long in such a short time? Why did he dye his hair black while in hiding? For his CNN close-ups, perhaps? There are 3 books which clearly map out the Zionist plan for world domination. The Bible, written by Hebrews, Morals and Dogma, written by Freemason Albert Pike, and the Protocols of Zion, written by the Priori of Zion and revised by the Zionist Illuminati. All 3 books describe the plan for an apocalypse or Third World War, which will give birth to one world empire and one world leader. This one world leader is called the Antichrist. The Bible is like a screenplay for a reality disaster movie, but with a fairy tale ending. The Zionist plan is to create an apocalypse that will exhaust and depopulate the masses through deadly designer viruses, global terror, economic disasters, and nuclear war. These disasters are timed to occur between now and 2014, when the remaining survivors will gladly embrace the promises of a handsome, charismatic new leader who will unveil his plan of hope for eternal world peace. The only way to achieve eternal world peace, he will explain, is to put an end to the 5 causes of war. Secretly, he knows there is only one main cause of wars: the wars caused by his royal ancestors who planned, provoked, financed, and profited from them. He will sell his peace plan by telling the world that border wars will only end by creating a world without borders. Religious wars will only end by creating one world religion of interfaiths. Economic wars will only end by creating a cashless, debt-free society. Rivalry wars between rulers will only end by creating one world ruler. The tools used for war, from handguns to nuclear bombs, will be eliminated, and one world army will be created, which will guarantee world peace. How will this eternal peace plan be accomplished? Through the United Nations, which is the brainchild of the Committee of 300 Ruling Families. The UN is their vehicle for world government and is located on 18 acres of prime Manhattan land donated by the most visible of the ruling families, the Rockefellers. The UN is a closed organization with no public records or open meetings. U.S. taxpayers have already invested $2 trillion in this world authority. Although most of the people working for the UN are genuinely working for peace, the UN is a godless organization controlled by the Committee of 300. These inbred ruling families pretend to have royal blue blood, but their blood is no more blue or royal than Hannibal Lecter's blood. Some speculate that these families of evildoers are demons or aliens or evil shape-shifting reptilians, but there is a more scientific explanation for their madness. For thousands of years, these families have practiced inbreeding between sisters and brothers, uncles and nieces, mothers and sons, to keep the power and wealth all in the family. This practice of inbreeding over thousands of years has produced a clever but pathological breed of conscienceless, sociopathic families who will stop at nothing to own every ounce of gold, every drop of water, and every blade of grass on planet Earth. The United Nations, which they founded and control, has clearly stated its goals of establishing a new world order, a UN standing army, and a global taxation system. The Queen's husband, Prince Philip, and Evelyn Rothschild have already established an interfaith declaration for the creation of one world religion. What would life be like in this world empire with one world religion, one world army, one world economy, one world court, one world media, one world government, and one world dictator? What the public doesn't know is that Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto and the Russian Constitution have been built into the UN Charter, and that the New World Order will be a communist world order. Peace on earth will be a forced peace in which citizens will have no rights. No right to bear children without approval, no right to travel without authorization, no right to own private property, no right to privacy, no right to bear arms, no right to protest, no right to receive an inheritance, no right to choose an education or a job or even a place of residence, and worst of all, no right to live. The right to live will be based on an individual's rating of usefulness to the royal elite. In this planned world without borders or nations, citizens will be disarmed of all weapons, including handguns, and will have no means to protest, fight, resist, or challenge this one world authority who will control them spiritually, economically, and militarily. Every human being will be electronically tattooed and will become helplessly dependent on this one world authority for all of their most basic needs. The masses will eventually be taught to bow down and worship this one world dictator who will rule the entire world from his eternal throne in Israel. The big question is, who is this charismatic leader that the entire world would be willing to accept as their ruler? According to plan, this future world ruler will prove himself to be a descendant of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, and will therefore be accepted by the Christian world. Some will even view him as the Savior and Messiah. As a professed descendant of Christ and a proponent of world religion, he will also be accepted by Buddhists, Hindus, and the Eastern world, where Jesus Christ reportedly lived, studied, and preached Eastern philosophy. Since he is a descendant of the Hebrew tribes of Israel, he will also be accepted by Hebrews and Jews worldwide. By marrying a Muslim woman, he will win the acceptance of the Muslim world. He will also be accepted by worldwide Freemasonry and secret societies, which he is a member of. As the son of Princess Diana, he is already loved and worshipped. When his mother died in the arms of a Muslim man in a Paris car crash, the world embraced him. On May 31, 2004, the Rothschild-controlled Associated Press published a photograph worldwide taken by Alistair Grant. The photo shows Prince William posing with a lamb like Jesus Christ, who the Bible calls the Lamb of God. What is the significance of this photograph? To the unaware observer, the photograph is perfectly innocent, but to insiders familiar with the protocols of Zion, Freemasonry, and the Book of Revelations, William is identified in the photo as the Antichrist. The Antichrist has been described in art and literature as handsome and charming and a master of lies and deception. Freemasons call him the Baphomet, or Goat of Mendes. He has also been described as the embodiment of evil and the enemy of God, and has been called Satan, Lucifer, Pan, the Beast, and Amen. He is commonly illustrated with cloven hind hooves. Why is Prince William holding up a cloven hind hoof in the photograph? The question of whether God or Satan even exist has been fiercely debated since the beginning of debates. Some people believe that God and Satan are inventions of the ruling class to control the masses. Most people acknowledge the existence of positive creative energy characterized by joy, love, and vitality, and the existence of negative destructive energy characterized by greed, hatred, and death. The triumph of evil in the world today is based on the ability of evil to disguise itself as its opposite and fool the masses. According to Masonic calculations, Prince William is predicted to be crowned world dictator in the year 2015 at the age of 33. Without organized intervention, life and peace on earth will take on a whole new meaning. How many people would be willing to play a game of Monopoly with real money if the banker was making up the rules, rigging the dice, stealing the money, cheating the players, and grabbing up all the properties? The answer is almost everybody. The truth is that only 1% of the world's population of over 6 billion people is controlling the other 99%. That 1% owns the world's banks and most of the world's wealth, land, and resources. So why is everybody passively cooperating with this madness? Because the wealthy 1% who write the rules have taught the other 99% to obey them and to feel powerless to change things. When people feel powerless, they cling to passive attitudes, like ignorance is bliss, things aren't that bad, or let God take care of everything. Before choosing a passive attitude, remember that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. Despite all the red flags, many people deny that a problem even exists. It does exist, and the good news is there are solutions. The solutions lie in knowing what the three biggest fears of the world's ruling families are. The first biggest fear is exposure. They have gone to great lengths to cover up their trail of crimes and to win the public's trust through their media monopolies. Without public trust, their ancestral plan for global control is doomed. Their second biggest fear is losing public support. If the public stops cooperating, their plan is guaranteed to fail. Their third biggest nightmare is organized resistance by an informed and fearless public. The ruling families know from past experience that the will of the people can defeat all their military and monetary might. Vietnam is a perfect example. There is no doubt whatsoever that these ruling families can be totally defeated by turning their three worst fears into a reality. Solution number one is exposing the ruling families and their generations of horrific crimes against humanity.
What's this shot got to do with electricity over stuff?
The most powerful form of advertising is word of mouth. Share information, talk about it, name names, recommend books, videos, and websites. Form your own study group and solutions group. Design a web page, show videos, films, and DVDs. Raise money, give money, organize, lobby, email, and do whatever you can to stop the madness. Millions of people around the world who protested the invasion of Iraq learned a hard lesson. They learned that peaceful protests don't work. Since the Committee of 300 Families created think tanks to mastermind a plan for global control, citizens must also create think tanks to mastermind a plan to stop them. Learn who the past and present members of the Committee of 300 are. At the top of the list are the royal families of Britain and Denmark, the international banking families, and the affiliated political families. Find time to research and read about the Committee of 300. Dig beneath the hype and propaganda, connect the dots, and share your information. The second solution for ending the madness is to take back control over your own money.
Sweet.
Right now, your money is in the hands of the ruling families who own all of the world's banks, including the privatized central banks. How did they get to be so powerful? It started with the very first banks. In the beginning, banks were a safe place for people to store their gold. When the bankers discovered that people left most of their gold in the bank for safekeeping, they started lending out the gold that didn't belong to them and charging interest on it. Soon, kings and royalty were borrowing gold from the bankers to finance wars. Since wars were extremely good for business, the bankers started stirring up conflicts that led to more wars. Then they lent money out to both sides of the wars and collected huge interest rates. Eventually, the bankers got so rich that they built banks all over the world. They made millions in interest just by loaning out other people's money that didn't belong to them. They bought mansions and fancy clothes and hosted extravagant parties. The royal families of Europe became the banksters' biggest customers and rewarded them with high society titles like Lord and Baron and Sir. Using their money and royal influence, the banksters changed the laws of nations so they could put the world's central banks, mints, and money supply into private hands, their private hands. Out of every $1,000 that each of their customers deposited in their banks, they kept only $100 on hand. They took the rest of their customers' money and made loans with it, invested it, and started up other businesses, like the steel business to create rails for their railway companies, to transport oil for their oil companies. Pretty soon, the banksters' new businesses grew into giant corporations. Those giant corporations turned the world's oceans, lakes, rivers, air, and soil into corporate toilets. When profits from all their oil, mining, and drug company monopolies soared, the banksters became the world's richest men, but their greed had no limits. They wanted to own the entire world, so they put their heads together and came up with an ingenious scheme to take control of all of the world's money and riches. Whoever owns all of the world's money, they said, owns the world. Using their media corporations, they launched a gigantic advertising campaign. They told people they no longer had to save up their money and wait for all the things they wanted in life. They could have everything they ever dreamed of right now. All they needed was a shiny plastic card. People rushed to fill up their wallets with shiny plastic cards instead of money. Like lottery winners, they went on drunken buying sprees and bought everything in sight, all the things they couldn't afford. Nobody even noticed when their hard-earned paychecks were automatically deposited in the bank without ever being cashed. Suddenly, people's bills, fines, taxes, and purchases were automatically deleted from their accounts, and paying by check quickly became unfashionable. Eventually, money was phased out altogether and replaced with units of credit, which were really nothing more than numbers on a computer screen. The next thing the banksters did was replace people's plastic cards with their newest invention, barcode tattoos. These barcode tattoos contained all of a person's private credit information and could be invisibly tattooed onto people's wrists. Since having a wrist tattoo was like having an invisible debit card, and since nobody could steal it from you, everybody rushed to get one. All people had to do to buy whatever they wanted in life was scan their wrist tattoo over a scanner, and so the power for people to buy their most basic necessities in life fell completely into the hands of the banksters. Suddenly, people couldn't buy food, medicine, or even a cup of coffee without scanning their wrist tattoo. Eventually, people sobered up from their drunken spending sprees.
What do you mean you got no money?
They realized they had traded their hard-earned money for nothing more than a bunch of numbers on a computer screen. Their real money had become virtually unreal. Not only did the banksters own all of the world's money, they now had the power to delete a person's lifetime of savings. But why would these friendly banksters do such an evil thing? To force people's cooperation. This futuristic scenario isn't as futuristic as it sounds. Invisible wrist tattoos with all of a person's credit information have already been developed. So what can you do to take back control over your money before the banksters phase out the world's money system? Withdraw your money from their banks. By putting your money in their banks, you are enriching and empowering them with control over your money and eventually over your life. Cut up your credit and debit cards. Pay only with cash or money order or certified check.
What are you doing?
People are under the illusion that their money is safe in the bank and that the banksters are honest. The truth is, the money you put in their banks isn't really there. Although there hasn't been a global economic crash since the 1930s, another crash could happen at any time and without warning. Economic crashes don't just happen. They are made to happen. Economic booms and busts are controlled by how much money the banksters put in circulation through their loans and interest rates. People believe Alan Greenspan, who announces U.S. interest rates, works for the Fed, and that the Fed is the U.S. government. The Fed is not the U.S. government. The Fed is the privately owned Federal Reserve banks, which are owned and controlled by the banksters. Every day the banksters move trillions of dollars around the world's banking and financial markets. They decide if the markets go up or down, soar or crash. But why in the world would they want to crash the markets? To destroy people's confidence in the money system and create a dependent, cashless society. According to the Zionist plan written by Adam Weishaupt and Albert Pike, the ruling families will bankrupt the middle class and repossess their private property. They will reinstate the military draft and continue disarming nations until there's no one left to disarm. They will make it illegal to possess a firearm or any other weapon that could be used to resist them. When the crash does come, they'll blame it on the phony war on terror, which they control and finance on both sides. So what else can you do to take back control over your own money? Take all of your money out of the rigged stock markets and money markets. Cash in your treasury bills, bonds, and retirement savings plans. Most of the retirement funds have already been looted. Trade in your paper money for something of real value like gold, silver, and precious metals and stones. So where can you put your cash and valuables besides the bank? In a personal safe or a very good hiding place. It will prove to be much safer than the bank. It's not the neighborhood thieves you have to worry about, it's the global thieves. By keeping your hard-earned money and valuables out of the banks and stock markets, you are depriving the banksters of money for their wars, weapons, and mass murder. You are taking back control of your own money. You know where it is, and it's available when you need it. No interest, no service charges, no bank machines. Many people are under the illusion that their money is printed by the government. Money is not printed by the government. It is printed privately by the banksters, who stamp it with their Masonic symbolism. Some community groups are creating their own system of money and buying and selling services and goods from each other tax-free. Monopoly money works great. So do IOUs and the barter system. When the crash does come, the markets and all of the banks will be closed for business. If and when they reopen again, your investments will be worth next to nothing, and your paper money will get you only 10 cents on the dollar.
Day tumbling right from the opening bell. The Dow Jones Industrial is plunging more than 650 points.
If you think you own your car, your house, or other credit purchases, an economic crash will remind you of who the real owners are. Most people believe that their hard-earned tax money pays for things like roads, bridges, schools, and other public services. The truth is that every penny of your tax dollars pays for your nation's national debt to the banksters. The banksters then loan your hard-earned tax money back to your government and charge interest on it for your basic public services. Before the bombing and theft of the country of Iraq, every citizen in America owed the banksters $70,000 per citizen. It is your skyrocketing debt and your nation's skyrocketing debt to the banksters that have helped them enslave the world, and they're doing it with your money, your labor, and your approval. Since the ruling families and their brotherhood of wealthy insiders hide their wealth and don't pay taxes, why should you? Find ways to avoid paying tax monies to these gangsters. If you earn an average salary over your lifetime, you will pay the banksters more than $1 million in taxes. 3/4 of your lifetime of work pays for your government's debt to the banksters and your personal debt to the banksters on your mortgaged house, your car loan, student loans, and other loans. The banksters' game is all about taking your money in taxes and then loaning your money back to you again with interest. They take property taxes, gas taxes, food taxes, clothing taxes, and dozens of other taxes and fees. Collectively, the public willingly hands over trillions of dollars annually to the banksters by depositing money in their banks, paying taxes to their central banks, supplying labor to their corporations, buying stock in their corporations, and then spending savings in their corporate superstores. So what do the banksters do with all your money that they pocket? They bomb, rob, kill, colonize, exploit, and advance their cause for global control and for your eventual enslavement. A third solution is to refuse to fight the banksters' murderous wars and to stop supporting others who fight their wars. One of America's favorite slogans is, "Support your troops," which means support your troops no matter what, even if the war is a lie, even if innocent families are being bombed, burned, and crippled with your tax money. Even if your tax money is paying teenagers in uniform to die by the thousands for the lie. The majority of recruited soldiers are naive, duped, unemployed teenagers who are romanced into believing they are heroes fighting for freedom. But what they are fighting for is the wealthy ruling families who are systematically disarming the world of all weapons of resistance to their global empire.
We've talked to...
Not to conquer anybody, but to liberate people.
A fourth solution is to stop voting. Most nations have two main political parties, which means there are only two candidates for the top job. One is the candidate for the very rich, and the other is the candidate for the even richer. Both candidates are sponsored by the lobby groups of the ruling families. Many voters feel a need to vote for the lesser of two evils, but they are still voting for evil and supporting a corrupt electoral system. Both John Kerry and George Bush are members of Yale University's Skull and Bones Secret Brotherhood, which is rooted in German Freemasonry. Not only are Bush and Kerry Skull and Bonesmen, they are also descendants of British royalty, the black nobility, and the Hebrew tribes of Israel. A fifth solution is to stop obeying laws designed to disempower you. The success of the ruling families depends on your obedience of their laws that they make and break, including the 10 Commandments. A sixth solution is to buy small and think big. Stop shopping at corporate superstores like Walmart or corporate grocery chains which are owned by the ruling families and their affiliates. Buy from small businesses and farmers markets. Grow your own natural food. The banksters have been genetically modifying and patenting the food you eat, the seeds you need for growing food, as well as animal DNA. Corporate farming that supplies meat to corporate grocery stores subjects animals to painful, inhumane crowding, filth, cruelty, and abuse. A seventh solution is to stop donating to charities. Most of it pays administration fees. The ruling families have set up big charities and foundations to create a friendly, charitable image of themselves and to cover up their real agenda. Big charities serve as a hiding place to launder dirty money from the drugs and weapons trade. The Queen's husband, Prince Philip, is the international president of the World Wildlife Fund, which is one of the worst offenders. An eighth solution is to stop identifying with a flag or a national anthem. Refuse to sing praises to America's bombs bursting in air, or to Britain's gracious and noble Queen, who is neither gracious or noble. A ninth solution is to refuse to recognize the illegitimate claims of the ruling families to your nation's water, land, resources, railways, airlines, power companies, health plans, and other publicly held properties that they have been busy privatizing while you were sleeping. The ruling families have been stealing your nation's land and resources through corporate privatization, which means they've been buying up your nation's publicly owned property. And where is it all leading? To an eternal world empire in which the power of these ruling families can never be challenged, and the earth and all living things will be helplessly at their mercy. A 10th solution is to name names. Focus the blame where it belongs, on the ruling families, not on their faceless corporations. Corporations like WorldCom, Enron, Merrill Lynch, and Halliburton are owned by real people with real names and real faces. The general public is deceived into believing that ordinary people who invest and buy shares in these giant corporations actually own them. Nothing could be further from the truth. The only shares that really matter are the Class A shares, all of which are owned by the ruling families. Their hand-picked lackeys who sit in for them as company directors get shuffled around like packs of slippery cards. The 11th solution is to reject the propaganda that keeps you passive. Bible believers are taught that an apocalypse and the reign of a satanic world ruler are inevitable because the Bible says so. Don't protest, don't resist, be passive. These messages are repeated over and over again to millions of Bible believers worldwide. Since the ruling families view religion as the opiate of the masses, they provide funding for organized religion worldwide. Christians, Muslims, and Jews have been tricked into praising their god Amen at the end of every prayer. A 12th solution is to arrest the Committee of 300 ruling families for their horrific past and present crimes against humanity. Those crimes include genocidal mass murder using America's atomic and chemical weapons of mass destruction on Japanese and Vietnamese families. Hundreds of thousands of innocent human beings were burned, deformed, and vaporized with taxpayers' money. The ruling family's crimes also include espionage, drug trafficking, extinction of species through environmental rape and pollution, extreme degradation, humiliation, cruelty, and torture, blackmail, bribery, conspiracy, slavery, racism and mass slaughter, ethnic cleansing. Their crimes include terrorism and the planning and cover-up of 9/11. There's grand theft, tax evasion, and insider trading, profiting from Hitler's Nazi labor camps and trading with the enemy, loan sharking, smuggling, corruption, political assassinations, and the list goes on. The Committee of 300 inbred families are clever, ruthless, and morally insane. Since they control the military, the weaponry, and the world's wealth, who's going to arrest them for their horrific crimes, and how? The world's citizens must gather together in large numbers and make a citizen's arrest of each of these 300 families.
Anarchy, let him go, fight his own war, let him impress daddy that way. No more blood for oil, we got our own battles to fight on our own soil. No more psychological warfare to trick us to thinking that we ain't loyal. If we don't serve our own country, we're patronizing a hero. Look in his eyes, it's all lies. The stars and stripes have been swiped, washed out and wiped, and replaced with his own face. Mars now or die. If I get sniped tonight, you'll know why. As I told you to fight. Come along, follow me as I lead through the darkness. As I provide just enough spark that we need to proceed. Carry on, give me hope, give me strength. Come with me, and I won't steer you wrong. Put your faith and your trust as I guide us through the fog to the light. At the end of the tunnel, we gon' fight, we gon' charge, we gon' storm, we gon' march through the swamp, we gon' march through the marsh, take us right.
The 13th solution is to get past your fears and take action. Fear is paralyzing, and the ruling families know this. They use their media monopolies to fearmonger, terrorize, and paralyze the masses. You are either with us or you are with the terrorists, which really means if you are with us, you are with the terrorists. If 300 insane families can figure out how to steal the world's power and wealth and enslave the masses under one world empire, then 300 sane families can figure out how to stop them.